Hi everyone. Okay, so this is going to be kind of like what I would do as a demo in lab for our gum paste flowers. All right, so I'm going to go over some tools and what you'll be making. So you'll be making 3 gum paste roses. And the amount of petals, actually I will be showing, but you do have a printed out template of how many petals to add, all right? Okay, so then we'll be doing 3 carnations along with the calyx. And then you will be doing 12 hydrangea. Okay, so there are videos that are more in depth on these flowers, and they are all in Talon. And then also, I almost forgot, 10 petals, all right? So we're gonna go over those petals as well. And then in your kit, you have rose buds, carnation buds. You have wire, hooked wire for your hydrangea buds. So you have to make these buds. They're not already done. And then wire, individual wire for your leaves. All right, okay. And then in your kit, you've got the cutters for these flowers. So you have your carnation cutters. You have two rose petal cutters. You've got a hydrangea cutter with a veiner. The veiner doesn't look like this. It looks a little bit different, but you do have a veiner for your hydrangea. You have a veiner for your rose petals, and it looks just like this. You've got a calyx cutter, and it's a replica of this. And then you have 2 different rose leaves and 2 different sizes, and they look very similar to this. All right. And then you also have in your kit a drying cups, looks just like this. You'll be using this for your rose petals. You have a veiner, I'm sorry, not a veiner, a groove board. And this is going to be used for your hydrangea blossoms and your rose leaves. You have plastic bags that are cut from the side and the bottom already for you. Okay, and this is where once you cut out your petals, you will put your petals in here to keep them moist. It's very important. And then if you don't already have one of these, I know it's in the list. This is a cornstarch sachet by Wilton. I think it's called a Dust and Store. And then you'll need some Crisco. All right. And then you have your pad. I believe it's blue. This is your softening pad to soften your petals. And then also, if you want to get one of these work mats, these are really nice. I got this at Walmart for I think like $5. Really, really nice. I have several of these, and we would be using these in the lab. So if you don't, that's fine too. And I believe you also have your gum paste rolling pin. Okay, so let's get started with our rose. So I had already softened these in the bag, and what I do is, makes it a lot easier, is I just take my finger and I just rub on the very edge of the gum paste, the very edge, and that's all I do. I don't go anywhere else. You want to have some thickness inside that petal for stability. And since you have two different rose cutters, what I do is I want to make sure that this is big enough for this bud, and I want to have some space up above this bud. So your buds are pretty big. You can use the largest one if you want, but I think there's going to be enough space for this. So that's how you would gauge what size cutter to use based on your rosebud. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with 4 petals. And then I'm going to just douse them with a little cornstarch. And I'm just going to go over them with my ball tool just on the very edge. I just want to soften that up just to make sure that it's really thin. I'm not going anywhere beyond the edge, okay? And then I'm going to put these in my veiner. And then this is just to give the rose some realism, as you would find in a rose leaf. Okay, and I'm just putting more than one just because of time. I normally do this anyway just because if I have several roses to make, then this just cuts a lot of time. And then I'm just going to take my water brush. Now you can use a regular paintbrush, doesn't have to be fancy whatsoever, and just grab yourself a little cup of water and it works perfectly fine. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place that bud in the center of the petal with the point facing down. Remember that point facing down. And then I'm just going to fold one side over and then just fold the other side over. And then I'll have like a little hole. You don't really want to see your bud underneath. You don't want to see that. You want it to be, try to get it to be completely closed. All right. And then I'm going to just wet my petals from midway down. And then I'm going to take my first petal and I'm just going to turn one side over. I'm going to leave the one side open. I'm going to tuck the second petal in there, and I want it to be at the height of my first petal, the height of my bud. And then I want to tuck okay, so it's going to look kind of like a spiral. And then you're just going to close those petals off just at the base. You want to keep these petals open at the top You want some space in there. And then I'm just pinching at the bottom. So pinching at the bottom, getting rid of the excess is very important. The reason being is that if you've got so many petals on this bud, it's going to weigh it down, and you might find that the bud actually pops out of all those petals because of the weight. Pinching it at the bottom makes sure that those petals are adhered to your bud. So do not forget about pinching the bottom and getting rid of that excess. Okay. And also another point is you'll want to get a styrofoam. It can be a very simple styrofoam. You can get it at Hobby Lobby, Michael's, and also floral tape. We'll go over floral tape at another time. But get yourself some just green floral tape and a styrofoam just to stick your wires in. Okay, so we're going to go for the second set. And I'm just going over the very edge of the petal. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to repeat the same process that I did with the first set. I'm just going to lightly wet them. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of the petals and I'm just going to cover one of the seams. And I'm just going to repeat the process. So I'm just going to fold over one side and leave the other side open so that I can tuck another petal over that. And remember, you want to make sure that it adheres at the bottom, at the very base. You want to keep it open as possible. Okay. And the thing is, it's really, at this point, they're not going to really fall over. So you don't have to worry about that. See, I'm just actually just turning at the very base. And then I'm just getting rid of the excess at the bottom. Okay, so for the third set, of 3. fourth set, which is 3, but it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to set them in our drying cups, and then we're also going to go on to set 5 and 6. Okay, so this is where this drying cup comes in. So I want to have a little bit of stability in these, and then the other 2 sets so they stay open. So you want to have your roses look like they're about to open, and you really want space in between your petals. Okay. Also, another thing is you have extra buds in your kit, extra wire, extra carnation buds, things like that. If you want to make extra roses, you can just make buds if you want, or if you want to stop, like, say at the 3rd set like this one is, you can. These flowers are going to be used in your final cake project. So really think about the colors that you want and stick with natural colors, like no blue roses, because there's no such thing as a blue rose. If there is, the florist is dyeing it blue or spray painting it blue. No black roses, things like that. Stay with natural colors. Especially when you're learning, and then you can go on, graduate to anything that you want. So I'm going to go on to the 5th set, which is 5 petals. Okay, so I'm just going to leave these here, like I said, for about 10 minutes or so. So let's move on to our carnations. Okay, so you have a template of your carnations of how many you need for one flower. And the first set is going to start with four little cutouts. You want these fairly thin because it's going to be really hard to ruffle if they're thick. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move my ball tool back and forth on the very edge of the blossom, or of the petal actually, because I want to stretch it out, and stretching out makes it ruffle. It's kind of like a rubber band when a rubber band is stretched out and then it starts to kind of ruffle a bit. You're basically doing this to the gum paste. So remember, half off, half on, and you're going to use a lot of pressure. I'm pressing down, and don't be afraid to press down. And if it rips, that's fine too. You can still use it. I'm just going back and forth. Okay, on the very edge. So my ball tool is half on and half off. So what I do is I just press down on the very edge and back and forth. Press down and then back and forth. Whoops. And then press down, back and forth. Let's do that again. So press down on the very edge, back and forth. So you want to add pressure. And don't be afraid to add pressure. So then I'm going to take one and I'm just going to wet the middle. I'm going to bring it up to my bud. And I'll wet the bud a little bit too. It won't hurt it. And then I'm going to just fold that in half around the bud. Okay. So it's going to look like a fan at first. And then you're just going to water one side and flip one side over, turn it around, water one side and flip that side over. And then I'm just gonna round it out a bit. So that's kind of like your little carnation bud. And then what I'm gonna do is just start moving these three up. And what I'm doing is I'm just gently kind of sticking it around that bud. And I'm going to do the same thing. So I just want to make sure that it adheres to the petal before it. And if you did see how it's just really ruffly and stuff, I've got one that ripped. It's going to add to the look of it, so don't worry. Okay, so that's the start of the 3 petals. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing as we did with the smaller ones. I'm just pressing and going back and forth. What I'm going to do is, because they're pretty floppy and pretty moist, I'm going to hang this upside down. And I have here just something that you would hang jewelry on. If you have like any sort of like shelving or something, or even like a doorknob or something that you could hang it on, to make sure that it stays out of harm's way, then definitely do that, because you're going to be also hanging your rose and your hydrangea on there as well. So let's go to our hydrangea, and let's go over a quick demo on making a hydrangea. So I have here some gum paste. You want to make sure that you keep your gum paste fairly moist, which basically means keeping it wrapped really well in your plastic wrap. Otherwise it'll get a skin on it, and then when you try to roll it out or you try to condition it like I'm doing right now, there'll be chunks in there. So it's really going to take away from your flower. So I'm just going to take a small piece and roll it in a ball. I'm just going to place it on the largest hole, and then I'm going to take my rolling pin and just roll, just to flatten that out. I want to be able to see that little nub. So I don't know if you can see that, but it has, you'll be able to see the bump, very slight. And then I'm just going to take this thick piece and just peel it off. And then you've got a little nub. This is for stability for your blossom. Okay, they call it the Mexican hat technique. So I'm going to put that back in there, put the excess back in my bag. And I'm just gonna make sure that I keep that nice and softened. The stuff dries very fast. If it's humid out, it dries not as fast as it normally would. However, just having it sit out for about 10 minutes will start to create a skin on the surface of it. So all right, so I'm going to cut out my blossoms. And I already have my little buds. These were pre-made, so I made these like 2 days ago. They need to dry before you actually attach your blossoms. Otherwise, they will pop off, okay? So I'm just going to place my cutter in the middle, in the center of where that nub is. Okay, so here we go. So like if they're sticky, just douse them a little bit with cornstarch and that should help. So I'm just focusing on the very edge. So once again, half off your gum paste, half on your pad. And really, it just takes a second. It doesn't take really long to do that at all. And then what I'm gonna do is, there's a little divot in here where the center is at. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to place the center in the middle. And I'm gonna do that a couple more times. And your center will get smushed, but it's still excess to give your petal stability. Okay. And then I'm going to put my wire in the center of this hydrangea. And I put a little water on there so it'll stick. And then I just want to just kind of pinch that excess to make a kind of a little stem. I'm going to hang it up on my rack there. And I'm just gently pushing. Now the reason why it's working well is because these centers have been fairly dried. So like I said, if they're not, they're going to pop right off. Okay, and I'm just twirling like this between my fingers just to kind of smooth that out. So that works pretty well. So if you want something that is open, kind of like this that has already dried, just hang them upside down for a little bit so they set, and then you can put this back onto your styrofoam and it'll dry open. So you can have some closed ones, some open ones. The ones that are closed just stay hung on the rack. Okay, so let's get to our leaves, and I have one here. So this, you're going to be using your groove board, and there's a really fast way of using your groove board. I'm just going to condition my gum paste. If you're feeling like your gum paste is just really kind of hard, this is, I mean, it's supposed to be, but if you want it a little bit more soft, more pliable, just add a little bit of water and knead that in, and that should help. Also, the warmth of your hands helps as well. So just, as you can see, the more I work with it, the more elastic it gets. Kind of like toffee. Okay, so I'm going to cover that with some cornstarch and make kind of a sausage form. And I'm adding some pressure to this, and if it wants to curl onto your stick, just add some cornstarch. Okay, so I'm going to lift that up. And then you have these channels here. So what you can do is you can make multiple leaves. Just center your cutter in the middle so that that channel is in the middle of your leaf. And I cut these out fairly thin. You really don't want anything thick because it's going to be harder to soften. Okay, so I have 2 of my wires, and I'm going to insert the wire into the channel, and I'm feeling as it goes in with my 2 fingers, and I want it to go in half the way. I'm just going to pinch at the very edge so that it sticks in there. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. And then I'm just softening those edges up. You don't have a veiner for a leaf because we just didn't have as many, but you can make marks on your leaves to give them a little bit of character. So what you can do is just take your dressing tool, or you also have a long tool that has a point at the end. You can use that and just make a middle mark and just go You can just play with the look of your leaf. You can curl it, kind of like, this is completely dry, and I curled it a bit. And this is where this comes in. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to place it, I'm gonna place these leaves on here and let them dry. And this is really helpful. This is really nice. We also use this for larger petals, things like that. So they're perfect for leaves. Okay. Okay, so let's get back to our rose. So I suggest working on other things while your petals are setting up. So these have set up pretty well. And what I'm gonna do is, to make them a little bit more curved, I'm just gonna take my ball tool and just go at the bottom, at the base of the petal, and curve them just a little bit more. And then I'm gonna wet them as I normally would. And then I'm going to cover the previous seam. Making sure that it's at the same height as the other set, the last set. And then I'm just going to close them, and then I'm going to just kind of play with the openness, kind of, you know, just give it a little bit of character. So as you can see, the seams are open. Some of them are actually open. They're not tucking themselves in any longer, just because the rose is getting bigger. The more, you know, sets you put on, the bigger it will grow. So from there, that means that you could either go to a bigger petal, or another way is just increase your petals. So I'm going to with these. Okay, so because I'm going to 5 and it's not going to cover each seam as if I were to put 3 on again, I'm going to offset them a little bit from the seam, but I'm also making sure it's at the same height. So, and I'm keeping it open because at this point you have more petals, so it's going to cover them and you want to be able to tuck them in. At some point it will cover a seam just because there's just more petals. Okay, so I'm just making sure that they're adhered at the bottom, and it kind of looks like a spiraled effect. And I'm just going to close them just a tiny bit at the bottom. So notice how open it is at the top, and it's just staying, it's not flopping. The reason being is because I don't have an overly large petal, and it's only thinned out at the edge. There's a lot of thickness in the body of the petal, which gives it more stability. So it's not wanting to flop over as if you would if you had a larger petal. Okay, so I'm wetting these. And so now that I have another 5, I can go and cover a seam. So that's exactly what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna make sure that it's at the same height, and I'm going to just close one side off, tuck the other one in, okay. And then if I feel like they do want to flop a little bit, I'm going to turn it upside down. Okay, so this needs to set a bit anyway. So I'm just going to put this upside down just to set, for the petals to set on there. And then I will start to manipulate the petals as to how I want them to look. Okay, so let's go on to the Calyx for the carnation, and also the Calyx for your rose. You don't have to worry about a Calyx for your hydrangea. What you can do is just dust your little stems with a little bit of green, and that should work out just fine. Okay, so for the Calyx for the hydrangea, it's a little bit different. It does have a longer stem on it. And I'm not going to use the groove board, but it will have, I would call it, it looks more like a witch's hat rather than a Mexican hat. But so I'm going to start with a ball, and about maybe like 3/4 of an inch ball. And I'm going to just take my hand and take the side of my hand, make a teardrop. Now, if you can't do that, if you're having problems, you can always just take your finger and go back and forth to elongate that. Okay, so I'm just going to keep on doing that. I have this very long teardrop, and then I'm going to start pinching at the base, and so it looks kind of like a funny green witch hat there. Okay, so if it's getting too sticky, just use some cornstarch. Should work just fine. All right, then I'm going to set that in the middle of my Calyx cutter and just peel away the excess. And then you could use the bottom of your paintbrush, anything where you can kind of, so you can poke that out. Okay. So what I want to do is I do want to soften those petals out. And I do have my ball tool more on my gum paste here, because I'm just pulling the gum paste out. And I'm just making an indent. And I'm just going to pinch that. All right. Then, like I said, you can use the bottom of your paintbrush, just make a little hole. Wet that hole. Also wet a little bit of your leaves coming out. I guess they would call them leaves, I don't know the correct word for it. So here is my carnation. Getting my flowers mixed up. And it's still pretty moist, but it's a little bit more set than it was earlier. So I'm just going to okay, so I just attached that, and what I'm going to do is I want to kind of pinch that farther down the wire. Okay, so, and then at one point I'm going to kind of pinch it away. You want a long stem, okay, for your hydrangea or for your carnations. Oh, it's nice and fluffy now. Okay, so there you have it. I'm going to put that in my styrofoam along with my other one. Okay, and then for my excess that I had, I'm going to make my Calyx for my rose. So I'm going to use the little nub again. It's getting a little sticky too, so let's just stick to my finger. Maybe you need a smaller ball here. Okay, I just want just a kind of a glump of it there. Okay, there we go. And I'm just centering that nub in the middle of my Calyx cutter. Pop that out. All right, so I'm just going to soften it a bit. And then wet. Okay, then I'm going to hang it upside down, and I'm just going to pinch that little nub and just make sure that it's really nicely adhered to my rose. So now it's a bit closed. I want it opened. So now that it's kind of set, and I know that these petals are not going to flop open, I'm going to just open them. And I kind of let it set for about, I don't know, it's been about 10 minutes. So I'm just kind of manipulating them. And and just kind of pinching them as, you know, a rose petal would look if it's starting to open. And like I said, if you feel like they're just, they're too soft and they just want to flop again, just put it upside down. That will help a great deal. So. Okay, so there you have it. We have some hydrangea and carnations and roses. Okay, so remember that more in-depth videos are on Talon. Okay, actually starting yesterday. And so the flower production will be 3 roses, 3 carnations, 12 hydrangea, and 10 leaves. And then, like I said, if you've got more wire, if you want to make extra, you can. Like I said, these will be on your cake. They're required on your cake. I think it's a 3 flower minimum. So, and we'll be going over how to arrange your flowers on your cake. So, well, thank you for watching.